Hello and welcome to EconVersations. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Sutter of the Johnson Center for Political Economy at Troy University. Bitcoin has captured the attention of many people around the world since its introduction in 2009. But this cryptocurrency is based on an innovative computer programming technique known as the blockchain. As radical as the idea of Bitcoin is, and it would be a form of money beyond the control of governments around the world, the blockchain has the potential to even more radically transform our lives and society. What is the blockchain, and what are some of the ways it's already starting to change society? Joining me to talk about this technology and how it might one day change our economy and the role for government is my colleague from the Johnson Center, Dr. Malavika Nair. Mal, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dan. It's good to be here.
So let's get started, but before we jump into this idea of the blockchain, let's just remind people, I know we've talked about Bitcoin before, but what exactly is Bitcoin?
Okay, so Bitcoin is this peer-to-peer currency where it's not controlled by any government, or it's not controlled by any one company or any one person. It's basically this protocol or this computer code which is creating Bitcoins. And when it started out, it had no value at all in 2009. But as we've seen over the years, it's actually been trading at, started off at pennies to the dollar, and then now it became about $1,000 to one Bitcoin, and it's kind of been volatile, but it's something that has gained a lot of value, and it's something that is created by this distributed ledger that we call the blockchain.
And so Bitcoin has been serving in some ways as almost like a money, but an electronic or crypto.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of, people trade with it and people use it like a money, but that's what makes it so interesting because no one person kind of controls its supply, and its supply is really programmed into the code or into the protocol. So how come stuff like this has value at all? And that's what's really, really interesting about it.
And there are a lot of interesting elements of this with regard to its use as a potential money, but then it's also used sometimes as a way of making transactions, right? So in some senses, Bitcoin emerged maybe first as analogous to a credit card, right?
Yeah, pretty much, yes. So there are two ways that it can be used. You can use it to buy goods and services, but a lot of ways that it is used today is as an alternative to credit cards, basically, as a payment service as opposed to a medium of exchange. So because it is much cheaper to pay with Bitcoin and to accept Bitcoin, every time a merchant accepts a credit card payment, he has to pay a 3%, typical 3% fee to the credit card company. But if you accept Bitcoin, there's ways to reduce that transaction fee to 1% or even 0% in many cases. So a lot of it we see is being used is like a payment service, kind of similar to credit cards.
And just that in and of itself is going to have a lot of implications for the global economy, because as much as we talk about the global economy, there are a lot of people who can't yet participate in the global economy, because getting access to money, right?
Exactly, because they don't have access to money, they don't have access to credit cards, they don't have access to commercial banks. There's a lot of problems with when poor people cannot be trusted to get credit cards. If with Bitcoin, all you need to really transact in the financial world is a cell phone and an internet connection, and that kind of opens up financial trading and banking essentially to literally millions and billions of people in the world who do not have access even today. Things we take for granted, things like banks and credit cards, but a lot of people actually don't have access to it even today.
Yeah, I was reading a statistic recently that millions of people in Africa do have access to the internet and they have cell phones, but they don't have money. They don't have their way to access global financial markets.
Exactly, and if we could, and Bitcoin is a great way to actually, move even small amounts of money. It makes it financially viable because the transaction fees are so low to transfer, even if you just have very small amount of savings, if you could take that and pool those savings and put it into, let's say, a mutual fund or buy some shares on the stock market somewhere else in the US. I mean, this is, now suddenly it's opening up savings from different parts of the world that were not available before, because it's not commercially viable to get small savings from so many people all over the world.
So Bitcoin is what is called a cryptocurrency, so although this is like a symbol, there actually is no Bitcoin. It's just actually computer code, right? And so if computer code is going to work, it's got to have some structure behind it so that people would actually sort of trust it to be money, right?
Yes.
And that's where this idea of the blockchain comes in.
Exactly. So the blockchain is this distributed ledger or this public record of all transactions that have ever taken place. And the way it works is that miners or people, anybody could do it, anybody can become a miner. They run the code on their computer, and what that code is actually doing is verifying transactions. Verifying transactions that are taking place on the blockchain, and each computer has to basically verify transactions in a way that solves a difficult math problem. And the first one to solve that math problem is rewarded with newly created bitcoins. That's how bitcoins get created. They're created and they're rewarded to the first person who solves this difficult math problem. Now, what is the incentive for people to actually supply power to the blockchain and to keep verifying transactions? It's just this, that you get rewarded. The first person to verify the transaction in a certain way gets rewarded with newly minted bitcoins. What does the blockchain get in return for this? Well, they get computing power. You have people all over the world supplying power and verifying transactions all the time, and that's what is powering the blockchain.
So just in and of itself, it's sort of a radical innovation to harness thousands of computers, computer owners, computer users around the world to volunteer. Well, they're not completely volunteer, but to offer up their computers to run this code.
Yes.
And to serve it in that fashion, right?
Exactly. So this is what we would call like incentive compatibility, basically.
And nobody ordered all these people to do it.
Right. It's
sort of emerged spontaneously.
Completely, because the incentives are there to do it.
And because we have so many different computers around the world that are running this, this, in effect, working on this blockchain, and that's what sort of makes it trustworthy, right?
Exactly. So what makes it really trustworthy is that the code or the protocol is completely open source. So that means that anybody, if you can understand it, anybody can look it up and anybody can verify it for themselves. You don't have to trust, one government or one company. You don't have to believe in them. You can look it up for yourself, and this is what is a large part of where the trust comes from. Anybody can verify it for themselves. So it's where a lot of the value comes from. And of course, also the value is coming from the fact that the code is hardwired to only produce 21 million bitcoins ever. So as time passes, it gets harder and harder to create or to mint new bitcoins. And this is what is causing a scarcity. And when there is scarcity and when people can trust that something will be scarce now and in the future, you know that you can value it. And that is in a large part to explain why we see positive prices for Bitcoin, because people can value the scarcity.
No, I mean, I have a smartphone, but my smartphone's hampered by having a dumb user, so I'm not very technologically or tech savvy here. But I think one way we can sort of understand the blockchain is to think about its function that it's serving, right? And it actually serves in some ways a very old-fashioned function, as we're hinting at here, but it does it in a very different structure.
Way. Yeah, in a way that nobody thought was possible, but it seems to have been made possible with the writing of this protocol. Basically, it's serving as a public ledger. And in a way, it's doing it which is completely decentralized, or even rather, it's actually distributed in a way. So what that means is, if you want to send money to me right now, right, you will typically do it. You will write me a check, and I will go put it into my bank, and the bank will transfer the balance from your account into mine. Now, what is that bank doing? It's acting as a central authority, which is checking the ledger. The ledger is your account and my account, and they're standing over those two accounts, and they're making sure that when I deposited the check, that the money did actually go from you to me. And they are the ones, the information is constantly going through the bank. Now, what the blockchain does is allows people to send money or send value over the internet, but in a way that is verifiable. It is verifiable. Somebody is watching. Who is watching? Well, it's everybody, because it's completely publicly available. So it's kind of, in a way, doing away with this intermediary, the intermediary which is the bank in our example.
So what we can really think about is the blockchain it's a very different type of something like this, an old accounting ledger. Somebody's keeping a book.
Yes.
But
It's actually
nobody's keeping the book, but everybody's keeping the book, and the book, the code is really the blockchain itself. Right?
Exactly, the code itself is the blockchain, and anybody can look it up. You know, so you don't have to trust. Right now, I trust my bank that they will move the money from your account to mine. I trust my bank that they won't take my money for themselves and go spend it, right? And it takes a lot of, you know, trusting in these intermediaries. And well, what does the bank get out of it? Well, the bank will charge me a fee typically to do this, and it's costly. It takes resources in our scarce world. You know, when every transaction has to go through an intermediary that is taking up valuable, scarce resources, right? And that's what this blockchain is doing. It's allowing us, for the first time, to kind of potentially, you know, take our financial transactions and make them completely peer-to-peer and potentially save up those resources.
So if we think about like one way to think about how it is that the blockchain is going to have a big impact on our economy is like anything that's any type of business that's sort of driven by a ledger type thing that has to traditionally been kept by some company or some entity, because we have a centralized system. Can be subject to being redone using the blockchain, right?
Exactly. So even things like financial markets and stock markets and, you know, investing in a mutual fund, what is a mutual fund doing? You know, they are acting as an intermediary between you and the stock market, and or even a broker. How do you invest in the stock market? You go through a broker, you go through your bank, and there are potential applications being built today that will allow you as just, you know, an investor sitting somewhere with, you know, small time savings, but to kind of do that directly without that middleman, and to do it safely and to do it in a way, you know, that you can trust.
So just let's go into this a little more detail. I mean, the stock market serves here, but it's in effect a type of a ledger, right?
Right.
Is it sort of like the record of who owns what stocks? And so if I sell you some stock, then, you know, somebody has to take the credit of the fact that I don't have the stock anymore, and you now have the stock. And so there's ultimately a ledger that's standing there, and the people keeping the ledger are sort of in between us.
Exactly.
They're intermediaries.
They're intermediaries, and why are they doing it? Well, they make, you know, they make a fee, and they and that's very crucial, right? Middlemen are very crucial in a world of scarcity. I mean, they perform a very valuable function. But if there is a certain technology which allows you to do the same thing in a trustworthy way without the middleman, that's actually probably better, you know, and that's what the blockchain will potentially let us do. So it's not that, you know, stockbrokers are bad or middlemen by themselves are bad. No, they're essential in any economy, in a world of scarcity. But technology could allow us to do away with that and, in effect, save resources, and that's what the blockchain is offering us.
And there could even be applications to, you know, pushing this further to coming up with a blockchain-based like stock for a company, right? Sort of like a different way of organizing a company, because when you get down to a company, the books of a company are again like another type of a ledger, and there's always the danger of those books being altered, or
you have to trust.
You have a fake set of books that are for the public, and then the real books are hidden.
And that happens all the time, right?
Yeah, and that ends up leading to companies that would be like stock or shell games or swindles, stock swindles. I guess historically were always a big problem, and stock markets emerged to help control that, right?
Exactly. So I think there could be a new form of company called the decentralized company, where ownership is kind of decentralized, and basically the ledger is kept by the blockchain. We could see
I think I was reading the other day that the Overstock.com, the CEO of Overstock.com was speculating about the potential of some type of a crypto stock.
Right.
Which I think is ironic or interesting, because Overstock.com was one of the first merchants to be willing to accept Bitcoin, right?
Right, exactly, yeah. They've been one of the big ones, and there's so many others, but the CEO of Overstock is very, very pro Bitcoin. I think he sees a good big future for it.
So seeing that it's not just something that has transactions or a way to make payments, but this technology has a lot of different things.
And it's all over. If you look up the news today, I mean, all the time there's new applications. There's entrepreneurs building new applications every day that could potentially change so many ways that we think we take for granted, that is going on right now.
Another way this might work out is through something known as smart contracts. That you could in effect use the blockchain as a way to do contracts, which again are a type of a ledger.
Right. So
and then you always have to have a third party or somebody to verify the contract or verify that party A's done what they're supposed to do, right?
Yeah, so right now, I mean, it could be possible to convert, for now, I mean, simple contracts, but put them into the blockchain where it is the code which is executing the contract. So something like as simple as executing somebody's will. You know, if somebody dies and they leave a will, you have to go to a third party or an intermediary, like a lawyer who is going to, you know, go through the will and who's going to execute the will. It could be kind of converted into code in such a way that it's actually the blockchain which is executing the will when a certain person dies. And the same could be done for things like mortgage payments, for example. Now, why is that, you know, interesting? Well, it's because contracts are only valuable if they are enforceable. If I promise to pay you something and you, in the future, when you give me goods right now, right, I mean, that's only going to be valuable if you can enforce. If I run away with that money, what are you going to do, right? I mean, there needs to be some way to enforce that contract. And typically how that works is we rely on government courts and we rely on the legal system to act as that outside enforcer, which basically, you know, uses a threat of violence and to enforce that contract. What the smart contract is doing is one way of kind of actually creating a self-enforcing contract, using technology to create a self-enforcing contract where two people can contract with each other and be sure that in case of a dispute, it will be taken care of.
And to some extent then, you know, if a contract is put into the blockchain, it would be there for anybody to be able to take a look at and see what the fine print was, or there'd be no, I mean, I guess there would still be fine print, but it would still be there for anybody to take a look at, to go back on. You can't sort of change the conditions after the fact or anything, right?
Right. And there's a new application that, or several which do this, where they're allowing, if you want to use a human arbitrator when you have a blockchain contract, you can do that. The two people contracting have to choose an arbitrator beforehand, and arbitrators compete with each other to get your business, basically. And you can look up different arbitrators and you can see what their reputation is for fairness in the case of disputes with blockchain. And again, it's actually quite radical if you think about it, and how it's different from the legal system as it exists today. This is kind of, you get to pick and choose a certain arbitrator, and you have already agreed that he has power over the situation to go forward with a certain judgment. And that, again, that's another way because the blockchain allows you to do that, because there's no way for that arbitrator to ever appropriate funds to himself. And that is why people can trust that the system will work. And that's what powers the system, because again, the blockchain it's public, and there's no way, if you put money into escrow using what's called a multiple signature key, there's no way for that arbitrator to appropriate those funds for himself. So now again, it's completely different from the way, you know, legal systems work today.
And that can be important in a lot of different contracting or legal frameworks. I mean, certainly lawyers who are in charge of a person's estate can end up, you know, appropriating the monies to themselves, right? And that's something that could largely be reduced or done away with through smart contracts.
Yeah, I mean, typically you have to trust the lawyer, you have to trust the whole entire legal system that is backing him. In the case of something going wrong, then you have recourse to the legal system. But here, this is a way of solving disputes just without recourse to that, and, you know, people being able to trust just that because of the technology. And if people can just trust this third-party technology, really, you can actually solve disputes just by yourself.
I guess another way to try to think about what's going on with the blockchain is that it's another mechanism to allow our peer-to-peer, our emerging sort of peer-to-peer economy to really flourish, because you can do stuff all across the world. So you know, talk a little bit about what exactly we mean by this peer-to-peer economy, and how it's already through different platforms starting to change the way we do business.
Well, anytime you can kind of communicate and not have to go through a central intermediary or a middleman, and when you can communicate just with other people and you can somehow trust the information that they are putting out there, when you don't have to trust an intermediary for the verification of that information. That is kind of like a peer-to-peer network. And we see this a lot. It exists all the time, right? So things like Rotten Tomatoes on the internet, Angie's List.
What does Rotten Tomatoes do?
So they do movies. If you want to rate movies, you can, if you want to know whether you should go watch a certain movie or not, and you're interested in a review, you go look it up on Rotten Tomatoes. Angie's List gives you reviews for like handymen and nannies. If you're interested in hiring somebody in your area, you put in your area code and you look up what other people are saying, or how they are reviewing the people who work within your area and what the prices are and stuff like that. Again, so this is just a way of sending information across people, which is not using an intermediary. All that is being used is this website.
Right.
So that it's that website which is acting as that central person or that central intermediary. So of course, people do have to trust in the reality of that website, or you are trusting somebody. You are trusting somebody, but it's a lot less than going through an intermediary every time you have to exchange information.
So instead of relying on movie reviews from an expert reviewer who, for all you know, may be getting some kind of a kickback from the studio to put on a good review for a movie, you would rely on the crowd or other people who have seen the movie, and any one of them might be lying, but in the aggregate,
exactly.
The crowd's maybe
what is
not.
the incentive? Yeah.
And so when we start to think about it, this could end up helping, affecting the role of government in our economy. And to get into this, we have to talk a little bit about something economists call public goods, the public goods argument for government, to see how it is that this technology could really sort of help reshape our entire society, not just how we perform some transactions. So if you could briefly tell us what exactly is a public good and why, what exactly is a public good here?
So a public good is, economists classify public goods as those kinds of goods which do need to be provided by the government, that goods that the private consumers or private producers are not going to have enough incentive to supply. And this is because of certain characteristics of the goods themselves. So to use the technical terms, so there are two characteristics that public goods typically are classified as having, and those are non-rivalrous and non-excludability. And basically what that means is that it's extremely hard to exclude somebody from using that good or getting benefit from that good. And non-rivalrousness means that the use of that good by one person does not reduce the use of the same good by another person. Now, the classic example, the best way to kind of explain that is think of a lighthouse, and that's kind of the classic example that economists use all the time. That the lighthouse is a great example of a public good because ships passing by through the area, all of them get a benefit of the lighthouse, and the use of any one ship of that light kind of shining out across the night does not reduce any other ship's use of that light, right? And at the same time, it's extremely hard to exclude anybody or to exclude a certain ship out, many miles in the sea from using that lighthouse. So now the question becomes, how do you fund these lighthouses? Why would any person or any group of people want to pay for these things if it's kind of free? Right, and that comes to this problem that we call free riding.
In economists, yes. Well, so we have this term free riding, right?
Yeah. So this term of free riding is basically, it arises when you have goods that have a lot of these characteristics of being public goods. Now, a lighthouse is kind of one end of the spectrum, and there's a spectrum of of publicness. But basically, the fact that if you can use something and not have to pay for it, like a ship passing in the night, why would anybody want to pay for it? If everybody can kind of get away with using something while not really having to pay for it, right? It's very hard to fund that thing. So how would that good be provided by society?
And then I guess that leads us into the rationale for government.
Exactly,
right?
And that is the main rationale that economists have for having government, because the government needs to provide these certain goods that private producers and consumers do not have the incentive to provide, precisely because of the free rider problem.
And so then if we want to understand if things like the blockchain are going to open up new possibilities for people to cooperate and maybe try to supply public goods with their own cooperation or through voluntary mechanisms, then that could end up why it is we could be seeing a shifting of the size of government, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, it's kind of one of the, implications if you kind of think through many steps. But, even if you think about Bitcoin just as the currency, not even the blockchain, the idea that private money could kind of come about and people could kind of start to use it, that's kind of really novel, and it does bring into question what is the role of government in money. Do we really need a central bank to be producing and to be maintaining the supply of a currency if you can actually see it come about privately? And of course, taking that further into the blockchain, if people can begin to contract with each other and also begin to settle disputes with one another, in a way that allows them to do a lot of trading and allows them to trade with strangers in a way, not just people who is sitting right next to you, maybe somebody right across the other side of the world, right? I mean, that really brings into question what is the role of government, legal systems, what is their true role? Is it as big as we thought previously, or can we actually change it because we can provide these things privately?
And I guess with the cases of money, we are seeing, at least some people are speculating if Bitcoin could serve as a currency, then that would be a shrinking of the role of government, right?
Right. I mean, it would be a shrinking of the role of the government because, it brings into question what is the role of the central bank, and the central bank has so much power over the currency. They can, basically manipulate its value if they wanted to. They can change interest rates, and they have a lot of power over the economy, really. But if you can actually provide a money that is privately produced and no one person has any control over it, and that people actually trust it and begin to use it, then that really does call into question the role of the central bank.
Well, Bitcoin has gotten a bad reputation amongst some people publicly because of its use for some illegal activities. And probably the most famous example of that was this thing called the Silk Road website. It was where drugs were being exchanged and people were using Bitcoins to sell it. And as in the news recently, because the alleged founder of the Silk Road website was recently, just last month, sentenced to life in prison for his role in organizing this website. So a lot of people associate Bitcoin to some extent with illegal activities. How should we how should we view the role of the blockchain in possible illegal activities?
Well, like anything, in the world, it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. But I think the takeaway is that it really depends. I mean, there's so many good things that Bitcoin is helping to do, and it's really a technological advance. And just because a few people choose to use it for, things which are illegal or things that are not good for society as a whole, that does not mean we should focus just on those things. There's so many things that can be used for bad things that doesn't, so many technologies, so like cars could be used, for kidnapping. Does that mean we say, do away with cars? Totally no, right? I mean, there's so many good things that cars are useful for, and, the list kind of is endless. So I think we need to think of it the same way. There are many people who try to criticize Bitcoin with these things, but that's really true of anything. You can make the argument that it's true of most things.
And to some extent, the blockchain is going to still be a record, a publicly available record of everything that was going on, right?
Yes, exactly. And that is also a large part of why they could kind of trace what was going on with Silk Road, because those things were publicly verifiable.
Well, thank you very much, Mel. We enjoyed this conversation. And thank you for joining us. Join us again next time for another EconVersations.